Hello, hello, my beautiful friends, and welcome back to the Fertility Confidence Podcast. Today is a wonderful sit down interview that I had with pediatrician Andrea Ali-Panzarella. And she wrote a children's book, Every Family is a Tree, after realizing from her journey of infertility and loss and using a gestational carrier that different styles of families weren't really represented in children's literature. And hearing her share her fertility story and also how um, she used her story to sort of help her heal, even, sharing her journey with her boys as they grew up, so that they knew and understood everything that went into bringing them down here to earth, which was so exciting. And when she was sharing with them about using a gestational carrier and surrogacy and realizing that these types of families aren't really well represented in our, not just our society as a whole, not something we often hear being shared that much about. And so I love that Andrea is spreading awareness, and not just for her family, but for all families and how diverse our families are. And I think these are really important conversations, not just to have, with our kids, but with each other as well, and being able to be open and sharing. So I hope you enjoy getting to know Andrea. We had a beautiful conversation about how resilient kids are and how important it is to have these conversations, but also how to have them, and what makes you feel comfortable. And everyone's journey is so individualized and so different. And you can check out Andrea's book, Every Family is a Tree, over on Amazon or all major book carriers. And I'll make sure that her website is linked for you down in the show notes. You can learn more about Andrea and her beautiful family. I will see you guys in the next episode. Welcome back to the Fertility Confidence Podcast. And I am so excited to be sitting here with my guest today, Andrea. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I am really excited to kind of get into this conversation about your personal fertility journey and kind of what you're doing now in the fertility space. So why don't we start with you just telling us a little bit about you, and then we can get into your journey.
Sure. I'm a mom, blessed mom of three children. I'm a wife, I'm a pediatrician, and I specialize in child abuse pediatrics.
Amazing. Amazing. And the book that you wrote, Every Family is a Tree, correct? That's the title.
Correct, yes.
How did that come about?
Yeah, so it really started with my journey with infertility. And that, goes back to 2011, end of 2011, so a while ago. But it was shortly after my husband and I got married, and we were trying to start our family. And the first time I got pregnant, quote unquote, naturally, but ended up with an ectopic pregnancy. And so that kind of started our whole journey with the infertility experience,
Yeah.
with a lot of questions, still a lot of questions left unanswered.
Yeah. Share a little bit more about your fertility journey for our listeners.
Right. So with the ectopic pregnancy, there weren't any explanations. I didn't have any risk factors. And so we wanted to really see if there was anything that we needed to do on our end medically to intervene, or if there's anything that we needed to just focus on as we kept going. Initially, the recommendation was just to continue to try naturally. And then when things weren't happening, after a few months, we met with specialists, and we both underwent testing. And the testing that was done for me showed uterine polyps, which were nothing that was contributing to the ectopic pregnancy or to explain that. But I underwent testing to just make sure my tubes were all, open and intact, and that the anatomy was okay, and that looked okay. But the testing that my husband underwent showed a little bit of an abnormality with a certain portion of his sperm that helps with the actual fertilization process.
Mm-hmm.
So nothing that we knew, nothing that he was aware of, and nothing that they were able to explain how it happened naturally the first time. But at that point is when they were recommending IVF, in vitro fertilization, specifically with ICSI, intracytoplasmic sperm injection, to help with that fertilization process and to increase our chances. And that was our introduction to IVF.
Yeah, amazing. I I love hearing journeys from with a male factor side of things because it is very much like that for so many couples where they're going along and trying and then we finally get to the testing portion and it's like, "Oh, here's something." And all of a sudden you are getting, you're not getting all of your answers, but you're getting at least now something that's spurring another piece of your story.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Um, but unfortunately, as we started with IVF, I think more pieces of the puzzle started to
Mm.
unfold and show itself.
Mhm.
Whether that was like my AMH level, showing my ovarian reserve, looking at my chronological age at the time, and just having, I think, the chances of pregnancy are miraculous in and of itself. So just putting all that together, just continued with months and then led to years of trying.
Yeah.
Um, so, I think we thought IVF, I didn't think it was going to be the miracle, first try and that was it. But we didn't expect all of the other things to unfold.
Yeah.
So when we first started, I got pregnant after the second transfer, and I got pregnant with twins, and we saw the heartbeats for both. And then by 7 weeks, we stopped seeing the heartbeat for one. And then the following week, we stopped seeing the heartbeat for the second.
Mm.
And so, that led to more testing,
Yeah.
genetic testing, things like that, but really nothing that was screaming, this is what it is, this is how we fix it. Just, more unexplained details.
Right. Yeah. And where did you go from there?
So that just continued. So after the testing more or less came back normal, I had some like abnormal thyroid antibodies, but nothing that was showing clinically, with my thyroid
Yeah.
level, but just trying, just supplementing with some medication just to see if that would help anything. I underwent a few more cycles that same year and had transfers that either didn't work or resulted in a chemical pregnancy or resulted in a miscarriage that I couldn't get past 8 weeks.
Mm.
I had another miscarriage a few years after that, from a transfer that, we saw the heartbeat initially, and then the next appointment we didn't see the heartbeat. And that genetic testing was showing normal, and so again, just a lot of things that were unexplained.
Yeah.
Um, and the months led to years and a lot of different cycles. So I ended up doing several cycles that were not successful. Eventually, at one point, we did genetic testing of our embryos, and because the working diagnosis was that it was an egg quality issue,
Yeah.
without any actual proof of that. So we decided to do testing because testing wasn't necessarily recommended for all the cycles, or at the beginning at that time.
Yeah.
And knowing the risks and things like that involved. But going through this now after a few years, we wanted to see exactly what was going on. And so the testing actually showed that most of our embryos were normal. And
Mm.
that was like really reassuring and pointing, less towards an egg quality issue,
Yeah.
um, and I guess more towards the uterine quality or a uterine issue, implantation issue, because even with the transfer of the genetically normal embryos,
Yeah.
nothing worked for
Right.
that,
Right.
and that kind of started the conversation of having a carrier.
Right. So is that when they saw that the embryos were euploid, they did the PGTA testing, and at that point, just with the length of your journey, is that when they felt that surrogacy was the best option for you to do?
Yeah, so we started the conversation, and I had a really great physician who was going to give me every chance that I could, that I was comfortable with, that she was comfortable with, that she pushed a couple of medical boundaries, but nothing that was unethical and nothing that
Yeah.
we weren't, aware of all of the risks and benefits involved. But we were just trying everything that we could so I could use my own uterus. I got,
Yeah.
testing for inflammatory issues or anything that was not along the lines of like just standard testing.
Sure. Yeah,
I
totally.
tried a couple of off-label medications, just to see if it would help with anything, but nothing worked. And so after that several months to almost a year, then we started to look into having a carrier.
Yeah. And what was that journey like, exploring and figuring out how that was going to go about? What was that like for you guys?
Yeah, so having a carrier is a whole different level of infertility. I mean, just being in infertility world itself was just, foreign, in the sense of us being the patient and being on that side of it.
Yeah.
And a lot of learning and a lot of like silence that came and a lot of trauma. But now this next level of having a carrier, when there wasn't a lot of information out there at the time. So I had to do like a lot of research on my own. We had to just ask a lot of questions and just figure out the process going through it. But it wasn't easy. It was definitely the best decision I've made, but the hardest thing I've ever had to
Yeah.
do. But there was a lot of grieving involved, and just a lot of processing all the different feelings that don't
Yeah.
make sense and that come up and that, you haven't really felt before.
Yeah.
Um, Thankfully, the journey itself for having a carrier was a positive experience. Um, but just, wrapping our heads around that was very difficult.
Getting to that point. Yeah, absolutely. For listeners who are maybe in that place of starting to open up that conversation of introducing a possibility of a carrier in their fertility journey, do you have any advice for them on processing the grief, on working through that, or how to find some resources perhaps?
Yeah, so I think therapy was a really big lifesaver for us, and for me specifically. We introduced, we were before we started IVF, we met with a therapist and just to kind of wrap our heads around that.
Yeah.
But then it took, we had to put it to the side because we were just focused on like the medical part, and we only had so many, so much time, so many resources, so much energy. But as I was going through this specific process, we had a therapist together as a couple. I had a therapist individually, and that was really critical, I think, for me, and just to give that awareness to like a new normal and just understanding all of those feelings and how to take care of myself through it and how to advocate for myself as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I love hearing the diverse stories in the fertility space because I feel like they're very underrepresented. Unfortunately, we're starting to hear more about IUI and IVF and egg donor and sperm donor, but it's still just not quite there at the level of kind of others feeling comfortable sharing because no one's really talking about it, right? So I think that that's
Exactly.
just thank you for sharing your journey so openly. I think that's so beautiful and so important. And the next piece being the one of the reasons you wrote Every Family is a Treat is to help kind of fill a gap in terms of helping your children understand and explain to them. And so I'd love to know about what that conversation was like with your kids in terms of navigating the topic of using a carrier for your pregnancies.
Right. So, and I think you touched on it with, just not having that conversation around what's something that's so common, especially miscarriage, just miscarriage in
Yeah.
general and loss. It's just this very, however we are in the society, it's just something that it's taboo. We don't talk about. I'm not sure why that is,
Mhm.
but that's, that definitely persists. And so for me, throughout my entire journey, I remained very silent. It was just too vulnerable. I couldn't take the comments. I couldn't take the advice. I was internalizing everything and then it was just adding
Just
to my trauma.
relax.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right, because I haven't tried that.
Yeah.
And that's the solution.
Yeah.
Um, so it was really important, when we had our children to not pass on because with the silence came a lot of shame,
Totally.
and I just was just ridden, filled with that, and I didn't feel like I had the courage that I saw a lot of other people have, to speak up about it and to educate others, but I wanted to. So for my when my children were born, I really made it a point. We decided that we didn't want to continue the silence with them and have them carry on that shame, and have them maybe hear their story from somebody else or have it be a secret and have them feel a certain way about that. And so from the beginning, we were really open with them as much as we could be, age appropriate. And we, continue to have the conversation so they understand their journey, our family's journey, and our story. And so that really inspired me to write the book, because I didn't see a lot of those types of books and a lot of that representation of our family out there in the literature world. And reading to our children every night, it was really important to find something to represent them. And so that's how that whole book journey for me
Yeah.
started.
Amazing. And as they've gotten older, have they had more questions for you guys? Have they been curious, or is it just like a totally normal thing for them that they don't even think about it?
Yeah, on some level, it's kind of normal and it's just, what it is, and they don't even question it. We tend to talk to them about it during certain like occasions, like their birthdays or when we have like our Remembrance Day, and so they understand about all the babies that we have lost and how we honor them and remember them, and we include them in that. And so they have an understanding as best as they can. Um, but the questions I think are not there yet, based on like their age. And I think we've done a good job at answering or kind of anticipating what they may ask.
Yeah.
But we're definitely open to any questions that do come up because I know it's the conversation's going to change like as they continue to get older.
Yeah, absolutely. And being a pediatrician that works in the space that you work in, how important do you feel are these conversations for childhood development in general?
Oh, it's super important. I mean, just reading alone is a baseline, going to be important and help with literacy, but having this representation for children to see themselves, whether that's in books or in movies or, in TV shows and art and music, just to feel their sense of worth and belonging in the world, I think really cultivates this empathy within themselves. And then also knowing and understanding that even though they may not see themselves, or if they do see themselves, they may see their friends represented as well. And just having that understanding for everyone around them, as we see in this world, there's so many different types of families,
Yeah.
and we know that they're going to encounter that. And so just developing that kindness and awareness will help with their emotional growth and children in general, for their emotional well-being into healthy adults.
Yeah, I love that. As a pediatrician, what age do you feel this conversation becomes very important as like I know we talk in difference of like age appropriate discussions, starting very young. When would you recommend people, if they are wanting to share their fertility journey with their kids, when would you recommend, based on your experience, is a good time to start opening up that door?
So I think it's a personal decision whether families even want to share that with them, and how they want to do it. For us, doing it right away was just the best choice for us, and it made the conversation just continue to be fluid, and it was just natural and just part of, how we did it. Developmentally, if we're looking at that aspect of it, probably around middle age, like school age, 6, 7, they're starting to grasp the concept of, and having that awareness of things outside of them.
Yeah.
And they're also now in school. They're typically in school at that age, so they're going to encounter a lot more people that come from different types of backgrounds. And so I think that's a really good age to at least start the dialogue to, just tie that in and help them understand. But really, like any age, as long as it's in a language that they understand, and they may not even remember it, or they may not even understand what exactly the whole concept is, but touching upon any of it can be helpful.
Yeah. And I think, like, for anyone listening to what Andrea said about it really being a personal decision into terms of what you share and how much you share, and even when you share it, is an important piece of continuing to release any of that shame that you might still feel. And Andrea, maybe you can touch on this, but even though this wasn't a part of my journey, I can really feel how healing sharing this part of your journey with your kids might be. Did you guys find that when you were starting to have these conversations that that was helping you get over some of that shame and grief and that came from the silence of your fertility journey as a whole?
Definitely. I mean, I definitely broke my silence. They had only helped me break my silence. And so just starting with them alone, just made me feel stronger and like a little more courageous so that I could share that with them and then to see their resilience. And then they're just kind of matter of fact, like, okay,
Mm,
behind it.
yeah.
And then when they did,
Whatever.
yeah. And then when they did have questions, like more specifically about, like, who's carrying who and like body and just as
Yeah.
basic as they can ask, but still having that understanding of it, really just reinforced me to continue to break my silence. And then writing the book was definitely healing. It took a while, it was about a year and a half, long process. I've never written a book before, and so it was just a whole different part of learning process. But definitely healing to do that. I was able to represent them. I was able to represent all of our babies that we lost. And then, I'm hopeful that I was able to represent all types of family that do exist. And that kind of motivated the larger part of the book to help others and other families kind of relate and feel seen. Um, and then it just opened up now this whole world because when I was going through it, podcasts existed, but there weren't any
Mhm.
fertility podcasts. There weren't podcasts about, surrogacy or carriers or any of this. So it wasn't a resource for me. And so now that I've seen the space that that has been created, I'm so grateful for that to have that for others going through this, and have that be a really powerful resource. And so that this is also part of my healing, right? To share my
Yeah.
story and to help others just feel like they're not alone.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the more we talk about it, the more others talk about it, the more it spreads, and I think that's so important and part of why I do what I do. I'm also a mom. I have a son and a daughter, and um something that I'm kind of enjoying and what I do from an education perspective, more so when I'm looking at kind of like my close friends and family, is how we're all trying to break some of those cycles of taboo conversations. And my daughter's only 6, so like we're not having in-depth fertility and miscarriage convos now, but being able to know when the time comes for her that she's going to have a much better understanding of her body and fertility, even when she's younger, and things to consider and questions to ask, because there's so many clients that I work with in their mid 30s that are sitting there going, I never knew any of this. And, looking back in my education, like we never talked about any of this ever. It was just things that you learned through experience over time. And as much as I wish no one had to go through a tumultuous fertility experience, I would very gladly love to be out of a job. That's what I tell everyone all the time, that just was no longer a thing. But going through the journey, what a beautiful space to be able to help the women and the men who are, coming up behind us and generations behind us, and in breaking our silence, in talking about it more, so that when they're going through it, they're not feeling like they're alone on an island, similar to how you guys felt like there was podcasts weren't a thing. There, no one was talking about surrogacy or miscarriage. You'd get the odd fertility conversation here and there, but it was still a very tight lipped hush hush. Don't talk about that. Don't make people uncomfortable. And the more we have these conversations, especially diverse families and different ways to make families, the more we're normalizing that. And I just, as a mom, especially feel so privileged to be a part of that message, but also I'm so happy that hopefully our kids are going to have a very different experience when they're hitting their reproductive years.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Even as a child abuse pediatrician, when we encounter sexual abuse cases, a lot of the times parents are not, or caregivers are not teaching children like their body parts, right? Like the correct names. And so a lot of that can be misinterpreted if they have these nicknames. So just even those basics, it's it's the body part, the name of it, the language that you use, and then what's normalized too in like in a checkup, in a, at the pediatrician's office, like to look at all parts, ears, eyes, nose, mouth, and private areas.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just, yeah, having that open
Open discussion.
conversation and discussion and transparency about it.
Yeah. This has literally nothing to do with fertility or anything, but I have to tell you this hilarious story of my daughter. So she was very, very sick. We took her to Emerge. They wanted a urine sample. She would not or could not pee. We don't know. So they had to do a catheter. And she was 4, maybe. And she's just screaming at the top of her lungs, "Don't touch my vulva! Don't touch my vulva!" And we're all just like trying to do our thing, and we're trying to calm her down, and they got her wrapped in a, anyways, it was a horrible, horrible few minutes. And then the nurse came back and she's like, "I just have to tell you, we are so proud that she just knew exactly what she didn't want to happen. She was using the right terms. She's like, we've never, ever had a kid in here saying that before." I was like, I'm just sitting there. I'm like, I'm so embarrassed, but also like, this is just par for the course with her. Like, she's not quiet, and she certainly was going to let everyone know. And you could hear like people laughing in all the curtained rooms around us. I was like, oh, I have to buy everyone popsicles before we leave here. But it's, as I think, kind of trying to tie this funny story in with our conversation, like the more open you are with your children, the more open they're going to be with you too down the road. And I'm assuming, especially in your line of work, like just how crucial and important that is as parents, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a proud moment for you to have that, to have her use that language,
Yeah.
especially in that setting. And I think, what a lot of people don't realize is how resilient kids are, and how much they can handle.
Yeah.
And again, it's going to be up to the parents and the caregivers, like to decide like what to share and what not to share. But I think what added to my silence and my trauma is that everyone just kind of pretended that it wasn't existing,
Wasn't
even though
happening.
they knew
Yeah.
about it. And a simple like "How are you?" would have gone a long way. But pretending and just not even addressing it made it worse.
Yeah.
And I think it's because people don't realize how resilient other people are too, going through this as well. And so I think that is something to remember for children.
Yeah. I think it's a really hard line to walk between wanting to stay silent to avoid, like you said in the beginning, just to avoid the comments and the well-meaning advice and the awkwardness, but also wanting to be acknowledged for the journey you're going through and trying to figure out what that looks like. And that definitely feeds into the uncertainty of, who to trust and where to talk about it. And again, like full circle moment, this kind of comes back to why I'm a big supporter too of therapy for all walks of the fertility journey, because your partner might be the most supportive, wonderful human in this world, but they're also going through it too in their own way. You're both going through it together and separately. And so having someone else to kind of help you navigate the grief, the uncertainty, the questions in terms of decision making, because like you kind of alluded in your story, the farther you get into it, the more decisions and uncertainty sometimes there is, unfortunately. And that's another kind of place that therapy can really be a beautiful experience to explore some of that with.
Exactly. And there's so many different modalities out there for therapy. We've done it all, like the individual, the couple, the support groups. And you just kind of have to know like what works for you. And I also had to figure out like when it wasn't working anymore, and then just to kind of move on. We've done different types of couples therapy. I've done like EMDR, which is a specific therapy, targeting trauma and PTSD, and I'm a big fan of all types of therapy for everyone.
Yeah. All of us probably
Yes.
need a therapist. I don't know what that says about our world right now, but it's not a bad thing. And it's
No,
not something to
it
be
does.
shameful about. It's
It
just
won't hurt.
good sense.
Yes.
It's just good sense at this point, I feel. That's amazing. Andrea, where can listeners grab a copy of your book?
Oh, so it's on Amazon. And then it's at like Barnes and Noble. And I
Perfect.
also have a website specifically dedicated to the book as
To the
well.
book. Is it
Yeah.
everyfamilyisatree.com? That simple?
No, it's my first name, last name. I can send it to you
Yeah, I'll make
if
sure
I
I
haven't
pop
sent it
it
already.
in the show notes for everybody to take a peek if they choose to buy from there and check it out. This was such a wonderful conversation. I think it's going to help a lot of listeners, even if they're not quite at the surrogacy conversation yet, but just understanding that they're not alone, which is really what this podcast is all about, is giving advice, but also hopefully helping others feel not alone. So I really do appreciate you coming on and being brave and sharing your story and your kiddos with us. And how I end every episode is to ask our guests for a piece of fertility advice that they'd love to leave for someone who's listening today.
Just any type of fertility advice.
Any type of advice you have for us.
I think my biggest takeaway is, along the lines of like kindness and being kind to yourself. I really believe that everything happens for a reason for so long, that I lived by that. And what I've realized that not everything happens for a reason. And I think that takes a lot of pressure off, trying to find the answer and trying to find like the silver lining and, just making it better when some things are just bad for no reason at all. And it's hard
Yeah.
to sit with that. But all the feelings around it are normal. And to
Yeah.
not like have that shame around, feeling those feelings,
Yeah.
and just giving that grace to yourself and being kind to yourself to allow yourself to feel that.
Yeah, I love that. I think being kind to yourself is such a good piece of advice. And it goes beyond just being kind to your physical body, but being kind to yourself with your thoughts as well. As we can be hard. Women can be really hard on ourselves. So I think that's amazing.
Yes.
Thank you, Andrea, so much for joining us. I'll make sure the link for your site is in our show notes so listeners can come and check you out. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much.